Okay, let's get started. So, good evening. On behalf of, thank you, good evening to you too. On behalf of Chris Francolini, the Dean of the William H. Hannon Library, I'd like to welcome you all to the first of the 2019-2020 Faculty Pub Night series, featuring Stefan Bradley, the author of Upending the Ivory Tower, Civil Rights, Black Power, and the Ivy League. My name is John Jackson. I'm your friendly and helpful librarian this evening. Those of you who are first-year students know where that reference comes from. Before we get started, I just wanted to say a few things. So I'm happy to say that this is actually our 10th year of Faculty Pub Night. So for almost a decade, we have been celebrating the work of our faculty through this innovative and interdisciplinary series. Every year we strive to recognize a wide variety of our faculty publications and creative works. We invite 8 faculty members, ideally from every college, and more recently we've also been inviting the law school to talk about their recent publications. So we're talking about publications, we're talking about scholarship, we have booze, now you get the Faculty Pub Night reference. So please tell your friends, this is not just for faculty. I encourage you to come to one of our other 7 faculty pub nights that we have planned for this year. We do one per month between now and the end of the spring semester. I have some flyers here at the front if you want to grab one on your way out. This also marks the 10th anniversary of the William H. Hannon Library. So I also want to invite you on October 2nd. Actually, this is mostly for the students in the audience. Faculty and staff, we have a different celebration for you in the spring. But for our students on October 2nd, we're doing a library open house. We did this last year. We're going to do it again this year. We're going to have games. We're going to give away T-shirts. We're going to have cake because it's a birthday party. So we invite you to celebrate our 10th anniversary with us. Also, I was talking to some of my students, and I've been told that people really like stickers. So we have these lovely William H. Hannon Library 10th anniversary stickers available. If you want to grab one, there's some at the front. You're welcome to put it on your water bottles, put it on your laptops, wherever people put stickers these days. All right. So finally, I want to call your attention to our feedback form. So on your sheets, on your seats, you have these little quarter sheets. Before you leave this evening, if you could please fill those out, tell us what you thought of tonight's event. We will share that feedback with our featured speaker this evening. It helps us know what you learned from this event, what surprised you, what was most interesting to you, and helps inform future faculty pub nights when we're looking for our speakers for the next year. Those feedback forms can go into that crystal box over there at the end of this event. Also, you'll notice there's an option on there to put your email address. If you sign up for our e-newsletter, you can be entered into a raffle for a $100 Amazon gift card at the end of this semester. So, without further ado, I'm going to get out of the way and give this over to Carmen. Carmen Walker, where are you at? She is going to introduce tonight's speaker.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. We all awake? We here? Yes? So my name is Carmen Walker. I am a senior recording arts major and an African American Studies minor. And this evening I have had the pleasure of being asked to introduce your speaker for tonight. So we're going to get into that. So born and raised in Yakima, Washington, Stefan Bradley is currently the chair of the Department of African American Studies and professor at Loyola Marymount University. He received his PhD in 20th century U.S. history with an emphasis on the Black experience from the University of Missouri, Columbia. He also got an MA in the same from Washington State University and has a BA in history from Gonzaga University. Wow, right? An educator at heart, Bradley's life ambition is to personally teach and mentor and inspire young people who change the world for the better, including a lot of students who are in this class right now or in this room. I said class, but I just left it. Wow. Some of Bradley's publications include his newest book, Upending the Ivory Tower, Civil Rights, Black Power, and the Ivy League, which won the History of Education Society Outstanding Book Award, as well as the Anna Julia Cooper and C.L.R. James Book Award from the National Council of Black Studies. He also wrote Harlem versus Columbia University, Black Student Power in the Late 1960s, which won the Phyllis Whitley Book Prize, and also Alpha Phi Alpha, A Legacy of Greatness, The Demands of Transcendence. His articles have been featured in the Journal of African American History, the Journal of Civil and Human Rights, and American Studies. To discuss his research, he's appeared on C-SPAN Book TV, NPR, PRI, as well as at universities and colleges throughout the nation. He's received numerous honors and awards, including the Don Brennan Humanitarian Award, the Better Life Excellence and Educational Leadership Award, the SLU Faculty Excellence Award, the Ernest A. Callaway Jr. Teaching Excellence Award, and the St. Louis American Salute to Excellence Young Leaders Award. He was selected as One Deluxe Magazine's Power 100. Generous with his time, Bradley frequently volunteers on and off campus. In the wake of the tragic events in Ferguson and St. Louis, he engaged in discussions with representatives from the U.S. Department of Justice, Civil Rights Commission, and Department of Education. As a voice from the community, Bradley has appeared on BET, MSNBC, CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, and in the New York Times. And also, so I don't fail my class, he asked me to freestyle a little bit, so I'm going to do that. No, but seriously. One thing that anyone has seen by being around Dr. Bradley at all for a substantial amount of time is that whether he's in the classroom or not, whether you're having an impromptu mentor session, because you never know when that's going to happen, right, is that he truly is committed to being for the people. We hear this term a lot, but very rarely do we see it being walked out in real life. He is for his people. Speaking on behalf of not only the African American community on LMU's campus, but also the entirety of those in this institution that have come into contact with you, we are sincerely blessed that you have decided to lend your talents, to lend your expertise, your care, your time, and your dedication. So I introduce to some and present to many others, Dr. Stefan Bradley.
They don't mess around and give me 2 microphones. I'm never giving them back, ever, ever, ever. Listen to me, I can't tell you what an honor it is to be here this afternoon, to be in this particular place. And so before I begin speaking at all, I want to ask the permission of my elder, somebody after whose spirit I wrote the book. I wanted to know if I could have the permission of my elders, Bob and Helen Singleton, if I can have permission to speak tonight. Now, please. Thank you so kindly. Thank you so kindly. Everybody, that was Carmen Walker. You may not know her name now, but I promise you, in some years, you're going to know her name. You'll probably see her on TV. You'll likely hear her on your radio. She's cold on a microphone, as you can tell. But she's definitely one of my favorite students. And we had to wrangle her into African American studies. Come on through. Had to wrangle her into African American studies, and we did the best we could. So everybody, check for Carmen Walker in the future. Let me also say thank you to the library staff, the coolest people on campus. Let's be clear about this. The library staff saves more than a few people. Like, we think they just save the students for their research projects, but I can't tell you how many times I've been saved. Interlibrary loan here. Who was it? Where's my sister Aisha? Where is she? Just saved me with a link to a video that I should have had, weeks before, but she came through clutch for me. So I'm so thankful. I'm thankful where everybody who works at LMU, clap once. Yeah. That's not too bad. I'm so thankful for my colleagues, especially those whom I've had the opportunity to work closely with, the people in EIS and OBSS, in student affairs in general, residence life. I'm thankful for you all. Thankful for my faculty colleagues. You get to hear me rant at the meetings and that sort of thing. Especially thankful for the fearless and fabulous faculty members of African American Studies who are in the building. Thankful to the senior administrative coordinator, Ms. Liz, who takes care of us all. I really appreciate you all so much. Most of all, second most of all, I'm appreciative to all the students who showed up here tonight. Many of the students I've had in class, many I've seen on the yard, but I treasure you, and I tried to write this book in your spirit as well, and so I'm thankful for you. Now, the most important people and persons that I want to thank are the people who set up the chairs, and my man Eric, who's on the bar over here. And I thank you for that. He knows what to do when all of this is over with. So if things start to go bad, I expect to see a line over there. Hey, listen, so what I want to do tonight is, if I can, I want to go ahead and just read a little bit from the book, tell you about how I put the book together, and some of the processing for the book and what I wanted to do with the book itself. After that, we'll open up to some questions, if it's okay by you. And so I'm thankful, and I'll just say this last before I start, that this is taking place in the library. And I hope you understand what that means. Like, the library is the one place that has as its goal to facilitate knowledge all the time. And this particular library is the library that says, we do let outsiders in. Now, I mention it in that very particular phraseology because when I was researching for this book, I was at a very esteemed institution that had been around since before there was a United States. And when researching, I said, well, I need to go into this library. And so I started diddy-bopping into the library. And somebody came and grabbed my arm and said, where are you going? I said, into the library to get knowledge is what I'm going to do. And they told me, oh, no, sir, you can't go in there. I said, oh, no, it's no problem. I'm a faculty member. Let me show you my credentials. They said, oh, you're not a faculty member here. I said, no, I'm not. I'm not. And so he said, well, I'm sure you understand that we just don't let outsiders in. That to me was instructional. It was instructional. I learned a lot from that one phrase. To me, he didn't mean it in this way, I'm sure, but there are students that I wrote about that were wildly intelligent, intellectually gifted. But someone along the way said, we're sorry, we just don't let outsiders in. I'm so happy my library isn't that kind of institution. So I'm thankful. Everybody, round of applause for the library. Who are the crazy kind of people that come out on a work night to the library? What type of people do that? That's hilarious. That's my type. Hey. Guest commentators on MSNBC's All In with Chris Hayes usually have the luxury of a calm, well-lit studio, and scholars typically have the comfort of distance when covering significant moments. On the night of November 24, 2014, I did not. Minutes into my conversation with Hayes in Ferguson, Missouri, I abruptly concluded the interview. I had been responding to his questions about the non-indictment, and I'll say it again, the non-indictment of Officer Darren Wilson for the shooting death of Ferguson teenager Michael Brown Jr. I explained that more than angry or shocked, I was saddened because the narrative of that night would be that the lawless, ungrateful black youth delighted in destroying other people's property. I wanted to express that more than anything, what I sensed was hopelessness. But the chaotic scene unfolding off camera behind me demanded that I shift my attention elsewhere. I hastily wrapped up the MSNBC interview, crawled under the fence of a locked-down compound to race to my car, which was parked 20 feet from the public storage building on West Florissant Avenue that was going up in flames. I pulled on the hot door handle and entered the smoke-filled vehicle. driving through red lights and weaving to the wrong side of the road to avoid the burning garbage cans in the street. I looked warily at the seemingly endless number of police officers and National Guardsmen. As I drove, I remembered hearing the moans, and I'll say it again, the moans of mothers, including Mike Brown's mom. I didn't know it at the time. And I heard the defiant shouts of young, angry people earlier in the night after the announcement. They shouted the whole damn system was guilty as hell. Somehow, I was finally face to face with what I had written about for so many years. Now, do you understand what we felt? Asked a participant in the now famous 1968 rebellion at Columbia University in the city of New York when he reached me by phone that night as I drove away. In terms of scholarship and research, I spoke with many of the right people and read the documents and papers, but I can only imagine the frenzy of the moment to write about it the best I could. The night of the non-indictment, and I'll say it again, non-indictment, when the Columbia alumnus called, I felt the anxiety and fear and anger that so many others felt a half-century ago, when demonstrations and rebellions were more commonplace, when if young people had a problem with the system or a president, I hope you heard me, or a president, or a war, they took to the streets or they took over a building, or they just made noise to voice their displeasure. The Columbia alumnus told me to be careful, but more important, to not expend all of my energy because there would be plenty more nights to demonstrate and many more issues to protest. He said I should prepare for the protracted struggle for freedom and justice, in addition to the emotionally charged battles that the people were waging. That was sage advice. Many of those black and progressive students who attended Ivy League institutions took advantage of the zeitgeist of the moment and protested when they considered injustice, protest what they considered injustice. But they also set the stage for future generations' freedom of access. Those students who activated in the decades after World War II should be recognized. And I wrote this book hoping to capture the spirit of those students. Now, I never attended an Ivy League institution. I sent in an application to be a custodian one time and they told me I wasn't qualified. But I know this much. I know the importance of Ivy League institutions, of the 8 Ivy League institutions. I know that 7 of them were here before there was a nation. I know that. I know that in 2008 and 2012 we celebrated when Barack Obama became the first African American to make president of the United States. Nobody should have been surprised, of course, when we find out that Barack Obama attended Columbia University and went on to get his law degree in Harvard Law, or that he married the likely more intelligent Michelle Robinson, who attended Princeton University and went to Harvard Law, or that their daughter Malia is in the class of 2021 at Harvard University, or that 50% of Obama's administration held Ivy League degrees, or that 70% of the people in the administration who were people of color had attended Ivy League institutions. We shouldn't have been surprised that people who either worked at or attended or graduated Ivy League institutions were the framers of the Declaration of Independence and Constitution. I'm only mentioning this because it obviously means something. It obviously means something. And so, what I tried to do with the book is to follow the instructions of one of my life heroes, peace be upon him, is a man by the name of John Hope Franklin. John Hope Franklin. He was able to get reparations for his family that suffered through the Tulsa race riots, if you remember. He was the man that wrote From Slavery to Freedom, one of the most important history books ever for its influence. Kind of started a thing. and I follow in his tradition, I hope. But he said that every generation has to write its own history. I wanted to be part of that movement. He said that we have to see America for what it was and what it is. What it was and what it is. And in my mind, the Ivy League institutions are representative of America in a way that many other institutions could never be. And so I focused and honed on these Ivy League institutions. One of the first black administrators in the Ivy League, a man by the name of Karl Fields. Karl Fields dealt with quite a lot at Princeton University. He said, if total democracy is to be translated from theory into practice, it will be done first in our educational systems rather than in our political system. The college or university in particular must bear the burden of this task. I mention this because I have to issue an apology to the students in the room. I'm sorry that we couldn't fix it. I'm sorry that we might have messed it up. But it's up to you to make it right. We're not going to be able to wait on politicians. I don't know if you're checking on what legislation has been passed out of the Senate lately. We're not going to be able to wait. It's your job. It's your job. So, what I tried to do with the book is do four things. I was going to talk about the admission and the arrival of black students to the Ivy League. I was going to talk about the, how would you put it, the actualization of black students in the Ivy League, getting to the point where they pushed against what we call assimilation and pushed for inserting blackness into the Ivy League. Third thing I wanted to do was to discuss the role of space and race in the Ivy League and what that meant in terms of expansion, in terms of the creation of cultural spaces, what today student affairs people call safe spaces. Now we know on the college campus there aren't too many safe spaces. We owe you challenge, and we owe you safety. We don't owe you comfort though, right? We don't owe you comfort. And then finally, the fourth thing, which is near and dear to my heart, is the arrival of black studies to the Ivy League. And so those were the four things that I was concentrating on. And so what I'd like to do is just maybe read one or two quotes from each of the chapters to give you a sense of kind of what was going on. And then after that, I'll talk through a few things, and then maybe we can get to questions after that. And so, all right. One of my favorite quotations comes from somebody who's actually in Southern California. He was a dean of the Annenberg School over at another institution that's in Southern California. Another institution. So, they messed up the rankings a little bit. They, Ours should have been a little bit higher. I don't know how they got the rankings wrong. They should have consulted me. I would have taken care of it. His name is Ernest Wilson III, Harvard class of 1970. And in many ways, he was able to articulate the awkwardness of his situation of being a black student of a certain kind of privilege in the Ivy League, in a space that was largely white. He said, I was born at the top of the bottom and on the inside of the outside of society. Tell me that isn't cold. Listen to this. I was born at the top of the bottom and on the inside of the outside of society. His parents were administrators at university. Happened to be at HBCU, Howard University. His father was in international affairs. he dined with regularly people like Sterling Brown and international leaders, Kwame Nkrumah, these kinds of people. But he was born at the top of the bottom and on the inside of the outside of society. Some of the students in the Ivy League felt a sense of obligation to participate in social movements, a sense of obligation. Now, part of this was an altruistic movement, but part of this was, I argue, an outgrowth of something I call double marginalization. Double marginalization. The idea is this: because of their race, they were marginalized on campus, these predominantly white campuses. They were marginalized because of their race, because of that. But because they had the privilege to attend an Ivy League institution, and if you're looking at the U.S. News and World Reports, all Ivy League schools landed in the top 15 or 17 spaces. Because they had the privilege to attend these universities, they didn't always fit in perfectly in their own neighborhoods. And so Eric Holder, who attended Columbia University, talked about him trying to be cool with his friends back in Queens. This is one of those things. And so because of that, some students felt an obligation to try to do whatever they could on campus, to exert what I've called in the book their black student power. That is, using their status as students, using their privilege as students to make gains on behalf of the larger black freedom movement. They didn't have to do this. This is, I guess, my point. They could have very well gone on to achieve their middle class, and upper class status for having attended an Ivy League institution. And by the way, many did achieve those statuses. But they thought of themselves as part of a larger project. And this is what I try to emphasize with my students. Let me not talk so much about that, but the point is this: they belong to a community which was larger than they were. The first part of the book, I have a chapter called Surviving Solitude. Surviving Solitude. And I couldn't think of any better phrase to describe what black students were going through in this pre-World War II period when they attended Ivy League institutions. The number was few. But there were those who attended. Let me tell you two quick stories about housing. Which is an important thing. Today, people are all turned up about the roommate they get and that sort of thing. Not turned up in this kind of way. Let me explain it to you. In about 1920, when Harvard University was faced with the prospect of a black student living on campus, they received letters from alumni. One alumnus was from Mississippi, and he wrote that he could probably see one day eating under the same roof as a black person in separate areas, of course. He said, and I'm quoting, he said, "But to sleep with a nigger is a horse of another color." Let me tell you something. This is fair Harvard. This was the most liberal of the Ivy League schools. This is what students faced. Anybody in the literature? Anybody like that kind of thing? There's somebody named J. Saunders Redding that you would know. J. Saunders Redding. J. Saunders Redding attended Brown University. His brother attended Brown and Harvard University. J. Saunders Redding was one of the first black faculty members in the Ivy League. At Brown University, he remembers coming in with, there were 4 black students in the entire university. 4 black students in the entire university. 2 graduated the first year he was there, and he was left with another student. Now, Redding explains that he went through extreme measures to make sure that nobody saw himself and the other black student together in public, for fear that people might think that all he cared about was black things. And so he wanted to show his worth. You see how sick this thing can get you? And so, behind closed doors, they would shut the blinds and they would close the door and lock it, and they'd be able to talk. Tough situation. He said, we were lost. The student, the other student, not Redding, mentioned that there's something wrong with this in reference to the way they felt constantly on alert. The unsettled student wondered aloud, there must be someplace better than this. God damn it, there must be. Declaring his desire to leave, the student shared his feelings. I feel like everybody's staring at me, all these white guys waiting for me to make a bad break. The student suffered from what modern scholars and psychologists call racial battle fatigue. That is, I didn't face down the Klan, but every day I got a little cut in me, a little slice. Some people call them microaggressions, some people. But it's little small things that weigh on you eventually. John O. Franklin remembered never being able to forget his blackness. He was fully aware of his blackness, is what he said. One student at Princeton University, which didn't desegregate until World War II. Princeton University had been around since the 1740s. A black student from Princeton, New Jersey, had made application to Princeton University, where he was given a scholarship, and the registrar's office told him proudly, register on this day. And he showed up in all his glory and his blackness. He couldn't hide it. And don't you know the registrar himself showed up to tell him that he wouldn't be able to register. Somebody wrote to the newspaper about black students, said, lest we forget, Princeton is the last of the leading institutions outside the Deep South, which still adheres to this faith in racial superiority. This is important. Like, the people who attend Ivy League institutions are those who make the rules in society in many ways. Those students who attended before 1945, I argue, did well to survive the Ivy League. They did well to survive the Ivy League. They didn't necessarily push back against the institution in a way that I write about for students who came about in the post-war era. But they went on to uplift the race in other ways. So the people that we're talking about are people like Charles Hamilton Houston. You may not know him, but you might know his student and protege, a man by the name of Thurgood Marshall. Or people like William Hastie. These kinds of people. People like Ralph Bunche, and these kinds of people. Okay? So, the people who came in the early 1960s were able to achieve a certain amount of access that other students weren't able to have in an earlier period. One of the quotations went, this is a chapter entitled Bourgeois Black Activism. One of the quotations went from a black student at Brown University. He said, don't stand together like this, man. If a bomb drops, they've got us all. He said, It wasn't difficult to reach the ego-building deduction that we were the only talented Negroes in the country who could pass the stringent admission policies of Brown University. You see how I can mess with your mind? See this? But then, on the other side of that, you start to wonder, if I was admitted, if I was chosen only to add some color, it's a tough way to go. At Brown University, black students, led by the black women of Pembroke College at Brown University, decided that the university wasn't doing, Pembroke, the college, and the university wasn't doing well enough to recruit black students. And so the black women of Pembroke College said, obviously we're not valued here, we'll just walk off campus. And the black women walked by the Afro-American Society, which consisted of the black men of Brown University, and said, we're boycotting the university, and you're welcome to join us if you want. And these black men were smart. They followed black women. They were smart. So they walked off campus, caught the attention of the New York Times. That's tough for a university to get this newspaper attention in such a way. They refused to come back to campus until the university agreed to admit 11% black students. That was the percentage of black people in the nation at the time. Hot dog. Hot dog. The university agreed to do so. Agreed to do so. Now this is important because the arrival of black students and some of the things that I talk about in these next couple of chapters didn't happen because the old liberal administrators thought it was a good idea. It happened because students agitated for it. Some of the black women who had led the boycott said, sounds good to me. We're going to get a black admissions officer as well. Let's go back to campus. The black men said, not so fast, not so fast. A commitment is not a commitment unless, of course, there's funding to support the commitment. And so as a result, they got $2.1 million towards the recruitment of black students. Now, some of you were thinking, in Ivy League money, that's, what, a calculation error or something like that? But I challenge you this, Jack. How about this? I challenge you to find the university right now that's going to give $2.1 million to black recruitment. And we all got these endowments. How about it? Sorry. Yeah, started to feel good to me. Okay. There was a sense of guilt sometimes at these institutions. At Dartmouth College, it was an interesting situation. Dartmouth College is, does anybody know where it is? It's in Hanover, New Hampshire. Hanover, which is in the upper valley of New Hampshire there, is one of the whitest cities and one of the whitest states in the Union. And they did a lot of funny things to recruit students, black students, to Dartmouth. Dartmouth students experienced things that were different from their colleagues and peers at other universities. Say, for instance, at Columbia University, you had Harvard right next door. At Penn, you had West Philadelphia right there. At Harvard, you can go into Roxbury. So you understand where at Brown, you had Providence, which had a sizable black community. Black students at Dartmouth didn't take over any buildings. They didn't destroy any property. They didn't threaten any violence. But they were able to negotiate for something that is unlikely. They negotiated for a space called the El Haj Malik El Shabazz Center. Now, some people don't know who I'm talking about, but that's Malcolm X. At an institution and it faced Daniel Webster Hall, another nationalist. One nationalist facing another, a black nationalist facing an American nationalist. How cool is that? Probably Daniel Webster would have turned over in his grave had he known. But I argue that's an incredible feat, and it exists to this day. And I just spoke there last year. It exists to this day. So people were wondering why hadn't Dartmouth students taken over any buildings. Somebody wrote a poem or a song to Ebony magazine. Does anybody remember what that was? Ebony magazine. Man. They still have issues in archives. But this is how the song went. And I want you to think about how you would feel if you were a student at one of the whitest institutions in one of the whitest cities in one of the whitest states in the Union. This is what it said. Song to my brother at Dartmouth. Don't get caught up in the enemy's camp, eating his food, thinking his thoughts. Chump. When's the last time somebody ever called you chump? I gotta fight. If you call me chump, like, I have to fight. Okay. And they don't want this. This is 150 pounds of thunder. They don't want this in there. Rocks with these like Hercules. All right. He said, chump, your brother's at home, poison, dying in the streets. Niggas up at Dartmouth being cool, acting rationale, playing the role. Nothing's a game, my brother. Dying's for real. If you're trying to make it in one of the whitest spaces in America, and you have people writing to one of the most popular black magazines in the world about you, just imagine how conflicted and hurt you may feel about the whole thing. By the way, these students were supposed to be making grades. I spared you the story about the Princeton student who was going to class who had urine poured on him. Can you imagine trying to go take your biochemistry exam? And this is what happens. This one is from Columbia University, where students protested the university's expansion into West Harlem, particularly into a park that separated the university from Harlem proper. Somebody wrote, no matter how much fun a youngster might get out of a good sports facility, it isn't worth sending them in the back door of a segregated gym. The university had planned to build a gymnasium in a park that it had already built softball fields. The softball fields were the greatest thing ever when they were built. The little kids got to play on the softball fields. The university, in university fashion, put out publications with the little kids in their uniforms, and one of the trustees said, that's a wonderful thing with the little league that we have here. A Negro lad on first base, a Latin lad on second base, a Chinese lad on third base, but they could all turn the double play. That's what he said. And then people started to notice the gates were locked in this public park. I hope you're following me. A private institution had gates locked in a public park. Now this park, let me not speak about it as if it's some kind of, as if it was like the Ken Burns series, those national parks where you have beautiful music. No, people got mugged in the park. They did. But Harlem people said it was our park. Black and Latino people said it was our park, Latinx. The university attempted to build a gym and say, well, 8 floors of the gymnasium will be for the university, 2 floors will be for the community. The 8 floors that were availing themselves to the university and university affiliates entered in one door, and the people from Harlem would enter in another door. And people were like, this reminds me of something. They said, Jim Crow. You don't get it? G-Y-M. Hey, bro, I see you back there. I see you. Yeah. And my baby girl back there. Yeah. Jim Crow. And so students, and this is important, thinking about more than their own experience in college, align themselves as neighbors with the community and with environmental activists and with politicians who were trying to get in front of the parade, as politicians tend to do. And they actually checked the university from building this gymnasium. This doesn't happen. This doesn't happen. Of course, some people showed up on campus. Two people whom I love probably the most out of the movement. A man by the name of Stokely Carmichael and another man by the name of H. Rap Brown. Stokely Carmichael was a genius who could break down Marxism to sharecroppers who couldn't read. And H. Rap Brown was one of the best with words. He said he was a member of the Bathtub Club. Anybody know what the Bathtub Club is? Hey, T-Web, earmuff the baby for me. He said, I'm a member of the Bathtub Club. That is, I see a lot of ass and I ain't taking no shit. Yeah. Please forgive me, it's a quotation. I'm so sorry about it. It's a Catholic school, please. Please forgive me. West Philadelphia wasn't much different than West Harlem in terms of the University of Pennsylvania's expansion. There used to be a neighborhood in Philadelphia, 2 Philadelphia residents here. It used to be called Mantua. Mantua. You know what the university, what the neighborhood is called now? It's called University City. This is what somebody said in 1968 when faced with losing his home. He said, "These houses may not be palaces, I'll admit it, but they're a lot better than being out on the street." Students, radical white students, black students, again allied themselves with community members from community organizations, and they took over College Hall, where the university agreed to meet with what they called the militants, and in doing so pledged $10 million for low-income housing because the students pushed. I hope somebody's following me. Because the students pushed, okay? In terms of black studies, one of the progenitors of black studies said the black struggle is not going to be advanced until and unless we develop a very, very clear high caliber of expertise. This is important, he said. He exclaimed as he pushed against the notion of black students sliding into black studies courses. Some of the black studies faculty are in here, and we get some people say, "Oh, those are cush courses, easy courses." Man, if you know what we go through, poor students in Robert Lang's class, you can't slide through Marty Campbell's class. Dr. Martin, you know you can't get in there easy. You know that. He said, the black community, which I'm intensely interested in, needs high-caliber economists, high-caliber lawyers. Okay? He said, he shuddered at the thought that students would go into the Harlem community with insufficient tools. And he said, and I'm not just going to do that. He said, damn it, that's the way I feel about it. I just wanted to say, damn it. I'm sorry. That's what he said. But this is important. This is important because black people, even in the Ivy League, once you've made it, had to justify themselves. I mentioned black studies because let's be clear about this. Let's be clear about this. It was the first discipline that students protested for in a university. Let's be clear about this. Nobody was like, give me my physics. I'm taking over this building till you give me my biology and that's it. No. It took students to bring black studies to university. And I'm thankful they did, because I get my check every 2 years. At Harvard University, this movement for black studies took on a whole new tenor. Black students were able to win a black studies department at Harvard University that eventually brought people like Derek Bell of the law school and others, all this Skip Gates and this kind of stuff. He got there because of the role that students played. But students, when they won their Black Studies program, they did something that was unique throughout the nation. Students won the right to sit on hiring committees, and follow me, and tenure committees. Please, Lord. When I was a student, I was like, this is the best thing ever. Yes. Yes. And then I became a faculty member, a professor. And I was like, maybe, look, the students is like, you know what, I did the best I could. I'm not sure I want them reading my package. That was historic. Because the funny part about it was that assistant professors couldn't be on tenure committees. But students could. I love it. Yeah. I love it. Okay. And I just got one or two more here. The fact that our efforts for black students should have grown from the goodwill of my administration and should have erupted into such violent feeling has been a source of more sorrow and distress to me than I can possibly say. That was James Perkins at Cornell University. In 1969, I was going to tell you about housing problems. Cornell University is the youngest of all Ivy League institutions. It started in 1865. Black students had been attending Cornell University since early on. Early on, they had to band together to protect themselves in certain ways. There was a rule early on that black women, that women had to stay on campus. Think about the paternalism and the patriarchy of all of this, that ladies had to stay on campus. That was until black women tried to stay on campus. And you see, black women had problems because they were black, and then also had problems because they were women. It's expensive, this racism thing. So they had to pay extra money to stay off campus and to catch the trolley car to come up to campus. You would think all of that would have been taken care of in the early part of the century, right? But in 1969, black women were having trouble staying in the dormitory again, this time because they had conflicts with some of their white dormitory mates. Some of the women in the dormitory complained about the smell of black hair products. I told a class earlier today that this is the problem with white people and black people never being around each other. The smell of hair straightening might be foreign to one's nose if you've never been around it before. Black women complained of white women touching their hair. Black women complained of, well, one instance in the book talked about somebody wanting to watch a black woman wash her hair. We must spend more time with each other. James Perkins was the perfect liberal. He was the president of Cornell University in 1969, the perfect liberal. He thought he was doing well with black students. Let me tell you something about the 1960s. Today, everybody says liberal versus conservative. That's what they say, right? And they think they're really doing bad when they call you a filthy liberal, right? Back in these days, if somebody called you a liberal, they'd feel bad for a different reason. People wanted to be radical. They didn't want to be liberal. And the liberals caught it as bad as the conservatives did. And so, back to housing, when black women decided they were going to leave the dormitories and start a cooperative called the Wari House. They were going to live together. Black men did the same thing. Well, the cross ended up burning on the lawn of the Warry house. This is important because we're seeing a resurgence right now in a certain kind of white nationalism and that sort of thing, right? A cross burning on the lawn only means one thing to the people where I come from. That means death is coming soon. That means death is coming soon. Black students, in an era where Malcolm X told them, if somebody harms you, you make sure to touch them back and make sure they never touch anybody else again. Black students decided that they would take over the student union building. It just so happened to be Parents' Weekend. Look, and the student union building also went as a hotel. And so parents were sleeping in the student union building. And so black students took it over, started banging on the door. Fire, fire! The parents come out, summon their skivvies, come out, saying, where's the fire? Black students turned on the fire hose and sprayed the parents. There was no fire, but the parents left. Students took over the building. Woo, you can imagine some people were hot. You can imagine. Can you imagine? Look, the vice president is here. No, nobody's taking over the student union that I know of. That I know of. White fraternity members said that that's not fair, that those students took over that building and are not getting in trouble. And so we're going to liberate that building. We're going to take the building back. And so they ran up, these were the kind of students. They said that we're going to make Cornell great again, is what we're going to do. And so they ran up in the building. And the black students who had occupied the building issued them a 2-piece and a biscuit. Some of you may not know what that is. In other parlance, they upstuffed the boogie on those students. And they sent them away. Now, this is important. I don't expect you refined people to ever know what it is like to be in a scuffle. But sometimes when in a scuffle, emotions run high and people say things that they may or may not mean. Now, I don't expect you to know these things, but I've heard about times when people had a scuffle and somebody hollered out, I'm going to kill you. Black students heard that when sending these students away. Now, maybe in a different space, in a different place, it would have been like, them boys tripping. But a cross just burned on the lawn. Black students were receiving calls to the student union with death threats. Black students sneaked in firearms and weapons into the building. Now, some of you, likely hardly any of you, will remember this picture of black students at Cornell University with rifles and bandoliers across their chests. Some of you might remember this. Well, that was a time when America, it was on Time magazine, when America said this militantism, this black militantism has gone too far. One of the things they don't let black people be in America is afraid. They didn't let Trayvon Martin be afraid. There was some hyper-masculinity going on. This idea that we're going to take up for our women and we're going to do it by way of shouldering weapons. Administrators were very uptight about this, and well, they should have been. And immediately afterwards, and black students won the right to more patrols of more security of the Black Women's Cooperative, and an Africana Studies and Research Center, which thrives today. Some of the top scholars there. But one of the things that happened because of this is the Cornell administration said, we can't have guns on campus anymore. I don't know what I did. It's not a good idea to have guns on campus anymore. This is high comedy to me. Anybody been to Cornell? Anybody know where it is? It's in Ithaca, New York, in the Finger Lakes region. Students regularly hunted. Regularly. But nobody figured out it was bad to have firearms on campus with college students, and I don't know if you know college students. And I know that Dean of Students is here and everything else, but some college students get drunk and inebriated. Maybe it's not a good idea to have firearms on campus, but nobody realized that until black students had firearms. Just like with the Black Panthers here in California. These are the things that students went through. These students that I write about were largely agitators. Most students, though, just tried to make it through. One of the ways that we write history is we love to mention the people that are charging the hardest, the ones that are bucking back the most. But there's a certain glory and a certain resistance in making it through. Students, black students who attended the Ivy League, they were at one point intruders, they were pioneers, and at points they had to be soldiers when all they wanted to be was students and eventually employed. I'm thankful for what they were able to do. And so I wrote a book trying to provide some nuance, trying to explain that racism wasn't reserved for the South, that racism wasn't just imposed on the poor sharecroppers of Alabama. I wrote a book to talk about Jim Crow North. I wrote a book to talk about the fact that not all black people were poor. How did privileged black people push against racism? The point of it all was that I found that black people, wherever they found themselves, struggled for black freedom. And I'm thankful they did, and I'm thankful you listened. Thanks so much. He said we can do questions. I'm not sensitive, so I take criticisms, comments, and everything else. But just as the song goes, act up, and you can get snatched up. So, all right. Yeah, right here. Yeah.
Were you able to get much information on the role of the Uncle Tom's?
Okay.
Not louder?
Is it on?
Okay.
Yeah, introduce yourself, brother. You don't have to stand up. You don't have to.
My name is Bob Singleton. I'm a emeritus professor of economics. And I'm really appreciative of this guy here because he's the person I came to LMU to teach one class for a friend. And the students wrote these beautiful, I didn't know you weren't supposed to take them off campus. I took them off campus, and the students wrote these evaluations, and the chairman of the department ran after me. And next thing I knew, I was here for 37 years.
They got you.
Right.
Yeah.
What I'm interested in, and I think it's a role that's often missed, is the role of the Uncle Toms in the institutions who were the nemesis, really, of the black students. Did you get much information on that?
Yeah. So we asked about the people who would have been oppositional to some of these students who were agitating and things like this. Did I get much information? I didn't want to spend too much time on those students, frankly. But I did have the opportunity to look into some of the attendees during the 1960s who had problems with the role that many black students played. And so I spoke briefly about somebody by the name of Alan Keyes, who was a student at Harvard University. He had problems with the anti-war movement. And so I wrote about Thomas Sowell, who was an economist as well, and he, in fact, resigned at Cornell University after, this is a black economist, and you would think this is a great thing. He had made comments that a lot of these students getting in here were, well, he would say things like ghetto snipes and things like this. But when the students took over Willard Straight Hall, the student union, he said, that's enough for me, and he resigned. He went on to a lucrative career as a conservative voice. And there were several others. Let me say this real clearly, that the opposition to students who were militant has always been part of the black experience. It's always been part of the black experience. The grand majority of people don't have the time or space to agitate. The grand majority don't. It's always a minority of a minority who's pushing for a certain kind of progress, and eventually people get on with it. So I didn't spend a great deal of time on people who were oppositional to some of the agitation of the late 1960s, but there were those who certainly were, and I got to spend some time on them. So some people weren't what we might call Uncle Toms, but they were more conservative, definitely. So there was somebody by the name of Rude Holland, who was at Cornell University, was a football player, went on to run Hampton University, but then went on to work for the Nixon administration as well. And so there were these kinds of people. And so, yeah. Oh, the beautiful lady in the back.
Simone has a question.
Oh.
What's your favorite Ivy League person?
What's
your favorite Ivy League?
What's
your favorite Ivy League person?
my favorite Ivy League person? Oh, my sweetheart. That's a legit question. That's a hard question to answer, Boo. I probably would say it would have had to have been John Hope Franklin, largely because he came from Fisk University. He had to prove himself again. Like, we could have said Du Bois, who said I was at but not of Harvard. I could have said that, but he never got along with anybody. So I say John Hope Franklin, largely because he proved himself at Harvard University. They wouldn't hire him back in the department. This says what it is to be like black and talented and gifted and intellectual, but you still can't get a job at Harvard, which is notorious for hiring its own. But he used his talents for more than just writing an earth-shattering history book. He was one of the people that researched for Charles Hamilton Houston and eventually Thurgood Marshall for the Brown versus Board of Education decision. This, I feel, is my responsibility as an historian, as a scholar, as your talents are supposed to be for the community. So that's my answer, Boo. Thank you. Wonderful question. Thank you. Yeah. Sister Helen Singleton, Freedom Rider. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Helen Singleton, and I'm also a graduate of LMU, you know,
Oh.
as well as UCLA, but I won't say that.
Yeah, then we don't even talk about that.
There is a series in the New York Times right now. It's called the 1619 Project. And as I have subscribed to it and read it, it occurred to me that this should be in the curricula of all the blacks, not just all the black studies centers, but it should be part of American history.
There it is.
Period.
There it is.
And I'm just going to ask the question, is it becoming part of the LMU curriculum?
So many people have requested copies of the various 1619 elements, and I can't tell you systematically, but all the good professors I know are using it.
Okay.
All the good professors I know. So, and that's to a person that I know.
Yeah.
Yes. And so,
I'm just going to say that as I was reading at least the first several essays, I just said to myself, every white person in this country should be reading this.
You know,
It isn't just for us, but it would open a lot of, open some of the minds of some of the people. So I just want to know, is it being taught here?
people are using it in their classrooms and passing it along in ways that are wonderful. In the country right now, some people are, people who wrote on behalf of that and acted on behalf of that are facing some backlash from elements of the country, like, aren't we tired of talking about slavery? The people who are even more tired, the people who were enslaved. This is what one of my friends said, yeah, they were more tired. Yeah. Wonderful. Anybody else? We'll go over here, and then...
Yeah, go to students first, or other people.
I just have one comment to dovetail off what Helen said. My name is Carol, and I think that 1619 should be pushed down into elementary level curriculum, right from kindergarten, first grade.
Yeah.
I don't think doing it, in college is enough
Right.
at all.
And there's a certain kind of privilege aligned with the idea that you wait till college to learn these things, which is detrimental.
So I'm hoping somehow that will happen. I'd like to talk to you about it if you have ideas of where to write.
Let's rock and roll. Yeah.
Hi, so thanks, Stefan. This is great, and I look forward to reading the book. What struck me as so interesting about the different themes that you're talking about is the ways in which your work is also really challenging the university and academic disciplines as well as places that are tied in with nationalism and imperialism and capitalism. And you see that with the creation of Black Studies programs that challenge traditional, I'm going to use the word traditional, 19th century academic disciplines that very much had imperialistic agendas as part of their founding. They served to support those agendas. We talked about Dartmouth being the university in the whitest county in the whitest state of the United States, but it's also a university that was founded as an Indian school, right? So explicitly, with a very explicit civilizing mission. But that also gets me to what is really my question, because I appreciate that you were very consistent about talking about Black students at the Ivy League rather than talking about Black people at the Ivy League, because of course there had long been Black people there, either as enslaved peoples who were brought with other white students or were enslaved by the university, but then also people who were employed by the university. And I'm wondering about the dynamics between the Black student activists you studied and Black people who were working at the university and I think in staff positions, so not the faculty, but in staff positions.
That's a wonderful question. Thank you for that. Let me speak, because you had two elements in here. One, you spoke to this idea of a certain kind of, if not white nationalism, white supremacy that exists at these institutions. Like, we think that it's the people with the shaved heads and the big boots. Like, we think that's what white supremacy is. No, white supremacy is when I go to Columbia University and I see on the library Cicero, Herodotus, Aristotle, Plato, but I can't find a sculpture of a Black person anywhere on campus. It's a small and subtle message that the important people, the people who had the best ideas in the world, are etched into the building. It comes in the way of, we have to take Western civilization, but where we start civilization with the Romans and Greeks. So that's to top off that early part of your thing. What I loved about your second part is this again gets beyond the reaction of students to what happened to themselves, but to how they interacted with working people. So one of the things that we saw consistently throughout the Ivy League, no matter how liberal it was, Dartmouth graduated the first Black student in 1828 or something like that. Or how restrictive it was. Princeton University didn't let anybody in until the 1940s. they all allowed black people on campus in the way of service staffs that would work for professors, that would, as you mentioned, at Princeton University, students could bring their enslaved people onto campus. In fact, one of the students turned in a black person that that the student had remembered from the South. The black person had escaped to Princeton, New Jersey, turned him in. The man was re-enslaved as a result of that. There was a relationship with black people that had existed. At places, students tried to unionize the staff, which was largely black. And so the cafeteria staffs and that kind of thing. So that was a thing. Columbia University, that was a thing. At Harvard University, where the university was expanding and erecting buildings all over the place, they said, well, at least 20% of the contractors should be African American. Mm-hmm. And they literally started taking over buildings to ensure that black people had the opportunity to work. This is one of those things where to me, I get especially prideful about the idea. Now, we can debate whether or not that's a legitimate thing to do or whatever. One of the things that I try to emphasize, and that we try to emphasize in African American studies, is that it's your job to care about people who could never step foot on a college campus. Somebody that can never be admitted to a university as prestigious as this. And so these students were doing these kinds of things at a moment where I didn't tell the story very well. There was something huge happening in Southeast Asia that required a draft in the United States. There are a number of ways to get out of the draft for those who are old enough to remember. You could be a sole survivor, right? You could be a conscientious objector. Remember Muhammad Ali? You remember that? But you could also get a student deferment. You could also get a student deferment. What happens if I decide I'm going to take over this building so we can get our black studies, and they kick me out of the institution? Now, if I happen to be a black man, now this is where I love history, because it all comes together. It collides quite nicely. If I happen to be a black man, that means I might have 33% more chance of going into the infantry when I'm drafted than my white counterparts. And you know what the infantry is, right? Those are foot soldiers, right? Those are the kinds that get shot at and shoot back. Mm-hmm. So I wondered what would possess people to risk this. Part of it was a sense of collective identity. Part of it was the sense that when you talk to people from the 1960s, black, white, or others, they talk in terms of we, not the French word. Talk in terms of we. You remember when we stood down the Klan? You remember when we shut down the war? That's the spirit that I saw once again in 2014 with students and young people taken to the streets to save democracy. Again, I'm thankful for it, and I'm thankful for you all again. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bradley. I hope you'll stick around for a little bit and possibly answer a few more questions. We've got copies of the book for sale from the bookstore, and I think Eric is here for at least another 7 minutes.
Oh, my bad. Look, get your drink on. Real quick, I had researched and archived in more than 10 institutions. Let me tell you something. Librarians, archivists are magical people. Are magical people. Thank the heavens for what you all do. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.